I never liked living alone. After my divorce, the silence in the house became something tangible, thick, suffocating, like a wool blanket pulled tight over the mouth and nose. Every tick of the clock echoed like thunder, and the creaks in the floorboards began to sound less like settling wood and more like footsteps. So, when the idea struck me to rent out the basement apartment of my old two-story Victorian home, it wasn't just about money. It was about filling the void, about bringing life back into this dying place. I listed the unit online, fully furnished, private entrance, quiet neighborhood, utilities included, and within a day, I had 5 inquiries. But one message stood out. It was polite, articulate, almost too formal. A man named Elijah. He and his sister, according to the message, were looking for a long-term rental. No pets, no smoking, full-time jobs, no kids. "We value quiet and privacy," he'd written. "We're clean and self-sufficient. We'd hardly be noticeable." It sounded like everything I wanted to hear. We arranged a viewing for the following afternoon. The sky was thick with gray clouds when they arrived. Elijah and his sister, Miriam. They pulled up in a dark, nondescript sedan and stepped out with the kind of careful grace you might expect from stage performers. Elijah wore a tailored coat, dark slacks, polished shoes. His skin was pale, his features symmetrical in a way that felt manufactured, as though his face had been designed by committee. Miriam was the same, impossibly smooth complexion, sharp, cheekbones, long black hair that shimmered in the gloom like strands of silk. They didn't smile, but they were polite. When I opened the door to the basement unit, they stepped inside and immediately began examining every detail: the window locks, the ceiling vents, even the grain of the wooden floorboards. "This is ideal," Elijah said eventually. Miriam simply nodded. We shook hands. Their skin was cool and their grips lingered just a little too long. They paid the first month in cash. Crisp, fresh bills folded tightly. I should have thought that odd. I should have noticed the red flags. But at the time, all I could think was how peaceful the house would feel with someone else occupying that cavernous basement. The first few weeks passed uneventfully. True to their word, the siblings were quiet. I rarely heard a sound from below, not even footsteps or voices. Occasionally, I'd catch a whiff of something strange, an iron tang in the air like blood or rust, but I blamed the old plumbing. I didn't pry. I never saw them bring groceries in or take trash out. They didn't use the shared laundry. Yet every time I asked if everything was all right, Elijah would simply nod and say, "Quite fine, thank you." It wasn't until the 4th week that I saw the first sign. I had fallen asleep on the couch watching an old horror movie when I was awoken by a low, humming sound. Not loud, but constant, like a tuning fork vibrating in my skull. Disoriented, I followed the sound. Through the house, down the narrow hallway that led to the basement door. The doorknob was warm to the touch. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard something that didn't make sense. An unfamiliar language, rhythmic and guttural, spoken in a strange harmony. Then a piercing wail that made the hairs on my arms rise. I staggered back. My heart thundered in my chest. I wanted to believe it was the TV or some neighborhood kid playing a prank, but deep down I knew better. That sound had come from the basement. I didn't say anything the next morning. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I didn't want to ruin a good arrangement over a single weird night. But curiosity ate at me like acid. That evening, after I returned from work, I noticed something new, an odd silvery residue on the back steps leading down to their door, almost like mercury, but thicker. I bent down to touch it and instantly regretted it. The substance was ice cold, and for a brief second, I couldn't feel my fingertips. They tingled for hours afterward. The next time I saw Elijah, he was standing at the bottom of the stairs staring up at me. I hadn't even heard the door open. He said nothing, just watched. I offered a weak smile and waved. He didn't wave back, didn't blink. Just turned and walked back inside, closing the door with a click that echoed like a gunshot. That night, I dreamed of tunnels. Long, wet tunnels that twisted and turned beneath the earth. I was crawling through them, breathless, the walls pulsing, with some organic rhythm. And ahead of me, always just out of reach, were two figures in black, Elijah and Miriam, moving without touching the ground, their limbs bending in ways that weren't human. When I woke, I found something strange on my kitchen table. A single white feather, long and rigid, too large for any bird I knew. It was stained at the tip with something dark. I threw it away, blaming a draft or a raccoon somehow sneaking in. But I started locking my doors religiously after that. Then came the smells. Every night around 2 or 3 a.m., the house would fill with an indescribable scent. Not foul exactly, more like old soil mixed with something sweet and rotting, like a corpse buried in a flower bed. I tried burning candles, spraying air freshener, even stuffing towels under the basement door. Nothing helped. The smell was always strongest in the kitchen, as if rising up through the floorboards. I asked Elijah about it once. "There's a certain preservation method we use for our food," he said. "It's cultural." That should have been enough. But something in his eyes, the way his mouth barely moved when he spoke, it unsettled me. Around that time, the neighbor's cat disappeared. Mrs. Greeley, who lived 2 doors down, posted flyers and knocked on doors. She was heartbroken. The cat was old, nearly blind, and never wandered far. She asked if I'd seen anything. I hadn't. But that night, I heard something scraping against the basement window, like claws. I started hearing more sounds. Whispers in the walls. Soft knocking that came from inside my bedroom closet. I thought I was losing my mind. Sleep-deprived, paranoid. So I installed a security camera aimed at the basement entrance. I told myself it was for safety. But the truth was I needed to know what they were doing. The first 2 nights, the footage was uneventful. Then on the 3rd night, around 3:13 a.m., the camera feed flickered. For 6 full seconds, the image distorted, pixels twisting into impossible shapes, colors bleeding into one another. And then a frame, just a single one, of something wrong. It looked like Elijah, or something wearing his face, but his mouth was too wide, his jaw unhinged, and something long and black slithered out of it. Tongue or tentacle, I couldn't tell. His eyes were entirely black, no whites, no iris, just endless pits. I replayed the footage again and again. It was there, real. I wasn't imagining it. I emailed the video to myself, backed it up on 3 different drives. Then, without knowing why, I deleted the original footage from the camera. It felt like something ancient had seen me, and I needed to pretend I hadn't seen it back. I tried to confront them. I rehearsed the conversation, paced the living room, heart hammering like a drum. But when I knocked on their door, no one answered. Not the first day or the second. I left notes. I emailed. Nothing. Then, 3 days later, a letter appeared under my front door, handwritten in tight, elegant script. "We thank you for your hospitality. We will be leaving soon. Please do not disturb us further. There are things you are not meant to understand." And just like that, they were gone. Or so I thought. I heard them moving again the next night. A soft, dragging sound. Something wet, pulling across the floor. I called the police, reported a break-in. 2 officers came, young and unconcerned. They checked the basement. It was empty. Clean. Too clean. No furniture. No personal items. Just bare walls, a concrete floor, and a hatch I'd never seen before in the far corner. When I asked about it, one of the officers looked confused. "What? Hatch?" he asked. I blinked. It was gone. That night I dreamed of tunnels again, only this time I wasn't alone. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the windows as if nothing had changed, as if the night hadn't happened at all. But I knew better. The strange events of the past month weren't figments of my imagination, and the image of that hatch, visible one moment, then gone the next, burned itself into my memory. It was like reality had slipped, like something had let me peek behind the curtain, only to slam it shut the moment I noticed. I didn't tell the officers everything. How could I? Hi, yes, my basement tenants might be otherworldly creatures who melt into the floor and whisper ancient languages through the vents. Oh, and there's a ghost hatch that plays peekaboo with reality. No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. But when the officers left, giving me little more than a polite shrug and a recommendation to get a motion-activated porch light, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I grabbed a crowbar, flashlight, and a pair of gloves from the garage. My hands trembled as I descended the steps to the basement. The door was still unlocked, still wide open like it had been when the cops checked. The air was cold, unnaturally so, like walking into a morgue. I turned on the flashlight, even though morning light streamed in through the narrow windows. It felt safer to pierce the gloom with something in my hand. The place looked scrubbed, too clean, like someone had gone out of their way to erase every sign of life. No dust, no scuffs, no fingerprints. The air smelled faintly of iron and lavender, a sickeningly sweet combination that made the back of my throat itch. I walked across the concrete floor to where I remembered seeing the hatch. The corner looked perfectly normal now, just concrete and foundation. But as I stood there, something strange happened. The beam from my flashlight flickered, not the battery dying, but more like it struggled to stay focused in that spot. As if the light didn't want to touch that part of the floor. I got on my knees and knocked. The sound was different, hollow. The rest of the floor made dull thuds, but here it echoed faintly, as if there were an empty chamber beneath. It took an hour of careful searching, running my gloved fingers along seams I couldn't see, pressing against pressure points that may not have existed, but finally, I found it. A rectangular outline, barely noticeable, just a few millimeters deep, but definitely there. I wedged the crowbar under the edge and heaved. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss and a burst of colder air, the hatch lifted. What I saw below wasn't a crawl space. It wasn't a basement extension or an old storm shelter. It was a tunnel. It stretched downward at an angle, carved from the earth but lined with something, blackened stone, almost like obsidian, veined with thin silver lines that pulsed faintly, like distant lightning. The air that drifted up was dry and stale, filled with the scent of long-decayed things. I should have closed the hatch. I should have nailed it shut and called a priest or an exorcist or a demolition crew. But instead, I climbed down. The descent was slow. My flashlight struggled in the darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The stone walls around me felt wrong. They absorbed sound, swallowing every breath, every footfall, until I felt completely detached from the world above. After several minutes, the tunnel widened into a chamber. My breath caught. The floor was covered in strange symbols, geometric patterns and curving lines, etched deep into the stone and filled with that same glowing silver. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it something floated. It wasn't touching the stone. It hovered a few inches above, an orb, black as ink, swirling with motion like a storm trapped in glass. I couldn't look away. The moment my eyes locked onto it, the world seemed to bend. The air shimmered, my skin crawled. And then, voices. Not out loud, not echoing in the chamber, but inside my head. You opened the way. You are the witness now. The veil is thin and the door hungers. I stumbled back. The voices stopped. My flashlight died, just like that. Complete darkness. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, but the screen stayed black, unresponsive. I turned to run, scraping my knee on the uneven stone as I scrambled toward the tunnel. Somehow, I reached the surface. I don't remember climbing. One moment I was blind and panicking in the tunnel, and the next, I was on my basement floor gasping for breath. The hatch was gone again, and this time I wasn't alone. Standing in the far corner of the basement was Miriam, pale as ever, long dark hair falling across her face. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there, staring. "How long were you down there?" she asked. Her voice was emotionless, almost synthetic. I don't know," I stammered. "What is that place?" "You weren't supposed to find it." She took a step forward. I backed up. Elijah tried to close it when we left. He failed. Her eyes flicked toward the far corner. "It's open now, and it knows you." My skin prickled with cold sweat. "What is it?" I whispered. Miriam didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked toward the wall and vanished. Not through a door, not through a crack or hatch. She simply walked into the stone and was gone. I ran. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with every light on, a butcher knife in my lap and a flashlight in my hand. I watched the basement door, waiting for it to creak open. But it never did. The next morning, I called in sick to work and began researching. Not just Miriam and Elijah, who, unsurprisingly, didn't exist in any tenant database or rental background check, but the symbols, the tunnel, the orb. I started on Google, then dove deeper into forums, image boards, and obscure occult websites. Most of it was nonsense, half-baked conspiracy theories and schizophrenic ramblings. But then I found a thread. It was old, archived from nearly a decade ago, and titled simply, "The Hollow Below." The original poster described discovering a strange tunnel under their home in northern Oregon. They'd found symbols etched into the walls, an orb and strange whispers. Sound familiar? I clicked through the archived comments. Most were trolls, but one stood out. A user named Deep Relay had responded, "If you see the orb, it sees you. If it speaks, you're already marked. Burn the threshold, salt the earth. Don't look into its eye." Another reply followed, "The twins can't stop it anymore. They're only its wardens. You opened the seal. Now it will want more." I messaged the account even though I knew it was a long shot. The last login was in 2017, but later that night something strange happened. A file appeared on my desktop. I hadn't downloaded it. The file name was a string of random letters and numbers. I opened it. Inside was a single image, a hand-drawn diagram of a tunnel and a ritual circle, annotated with warnings and glyphs. At the bottom, a scrawled note. "They are not dead. They are waiting, and they are hungry." The strange thing about terror, real terror, is how quickly it becomes part of you, like a new limb or a second shadow. After that night, after I saw Miriam vanish into the wall and that cursed file appeared on my desktop, I stopped questioning what was real and what wasn't. I just accepted that something had changed, something fundamental. My house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a wound. The next few days were quiet. No noises, no sightings, no smells. But I didn't take that as comfort. It felt like the silence before a storm, like something was watching, waiting, studying how I would react. And then the dreams started again, not just vague, fog-drenched nightmares. These were vivid, detailed, repeating. I was always back in that tunnel, the obsidian-lined walls pulsing, with silver light, the orb spinning in the dark like a black sun. But now, there was something else in the dream, figures surrounding it. Not Elijah or Miriam, but dozens, maybe hundreds, tall and thin, cloaked in writhing shadows. Their faces were hidden behind bone-white masks etched with symbols. They chanted in that same rhythmic language I'd heard weeks before, the one that made my ears ring and my stomach churn. Each time I woke, I found something strange in my room. One morning it was dirt on my sheets. Another time, my closet door stood open with no memory of opening it. Once, I found small footprints, bare, in a fine dust that wasn't there before, leading from the basement door to the foot of my bed. I stopped sleeping. I taped blackout curtains to the windows and covered the mirrors. Not just because I was scared, but because something had changed about my reflection. It didn't always match. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I saw my reflection blink when I didn't. Once I saw it smile slowly as I stood frozen, mouth slack and lifeless. That was when I first noticed the mark. I was shaving, face lathered in foam, when I noticed a small symbol just beneath the hairline behind my left ear, a perfect triangle. Inside it, an eye, etched into my skin like a scar I'd never noticed. My fingers trembled as I touched it. It didn't hurt, but it felt warm, almost like it was alive. I took a photo with my phone just to make sure it was real. It was. The photo showed the mark clear as day. But when I showed it to a coworker, just to gauge their reaction, they saw nothing. "Looks like a mole, dude," they said. But I knew what it was. It was the same eye that appeared in the diagrams from the desktop file, the same shape etched in the stones underground. I tried to scrub it off. Alcohol, bleach, sandpaper. Nothing worked. It wasn't on my skin. It was my skin. I needed answers. The thread on that ancient forum had led me to something real, something other people had experienced. But the username Deep Relay was a ghost, the account inactive. And yet someone had sent me that file. Someone was watching. I went back to the forum archives and scoured every post the user had ever made. Most were cryptic, warnings, bits of lore, mentions of the deep memory, and the threshold keepers. But one post, buried deep in an unrelated thread, caught my attention. It mentioned a location. "There's another door, near the reservation line north of Crescent Hollow, marked by the stone with the eye. Don't go alone." Crescent Hollow was 3 hours away. I hadn't driven that far in months, maybe years. But something inside me said I needed to go, that the answers weren't in the house anymore. They were out there, where the rot first seeped into the world. I packed a backpack, flashlight, spare batteries, notebook, food, water, the printed file from the desktop. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The drive was long and uneventful until the final stretch. As I crossed the faded county line sign into Crescent Hollow, the radio died. Not the static kind of dead, just silence. The display screen still worked, showing the track name and time, but no sound came through. Then my phone screen turned black and refused to reboot. The trees grew denser. The light dimmed, even though it was barely past noon. I followed the GPS directions I'd memorized before leaving, weaving through forgotten roads, old gravel trails, until I saw it, a single stone outcropping by the side of a field. Carved into it, unmistakable in the pale light, was the eye. The same one from my mark. I parked and stepped out. The air smelled wrong, like wet metal and something long dead. I walked toward the stone. Beyond it, the earth sloped downward into a shallow ravine. Brambles and dry grass gave way to a clearing lined with old trees. In the center of the clearing stood what I can only describe as a ruin. Stone pillars arranged in a perfect circle, all leaning inward like teeth. As I stepped between them, a pressure bloomed behind my eyes. Not pain, just weight. And then I saw the second door. It wasn't made of wood or metal. It was stone, black and seamless, carved into the hillside like a mausoleum. Symbols lined the frame, glowing faintly as I approached. The air pulsed. The mark behind my ear burned softly. I reached out. My hand brushed the stone, and the door opened. Inside was a tunnel. Of course it was. It mirrored the one beneath my house perfectly. The same pulsing veins of silver, the same oppressive silence. I walked for what felt like hours. Time didn't flow right down there. My watch stopped ticking. My flashlight dimmed, even with new batteries. But I pressed on, deeper into the earth. Eventually, I reached another chamber, bigger than the one under my house, and filled with mirrors. Tall, ancient-looking mirrors, rimmed in brass and bone, each one flickering with a different image. I approached one and saw my childhood, bedroom. Another showed a frozen version of my kitchen. One mirror displayed my own face, staring back at me, mouth moving soundlessly. Then I saw them, the twins, Elijah and Miriam, standing in front of a mirror at the far end of the chamber. Except they weren't looking at the reflection. They were looking through it. Like the mirror wasn't glass, but a window. "Elijah?" I said, the word weak in my throat. He turned slowly. "You've seen too much," he said. "We tried to contain it, but your curiosity made you its vessel." "I don't understand," I whispered. "What is it?" "The memory," Miriam said from behind him. "It's not a thing. It's a force, a hunger. It seeps into cracks, minds, places, moments. Once opened, it cannot be closed, only fed." Elijah stepped forward. His eyes glimmered like mirrors. "Themselves. You touched it, heard its voice. That makes you a gate." "I didn't want this," I said, backing away. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No one does," Miriam said softly. "The orb chooses, the mark seals." Then the mirrors began to flicker. One by one they shattered, not with sound, but with light, beams shooting into the air like reverse lightning. And in the distance, from beyond the chamber walls, came a sound I'll never forget, a deep, rumbling whisper, not in words, not in language, but in meaning, ancient, vast, hungry. The orb was awake again. The sound wasn't sound. It was a presence, blooming behind my eyes like migraine static. My knees buckled under the weight of it. An ocean of meaning poured into my skull, no vessel big enough to contain it. The shattered mirrors around me didn't fall in pieces. They dissolved, each one unraveling into threads of light that wormed through the air and vanished into cracks in the stone floor. Miriam stepped away from Elijah and stood beside me, her voice flat but urgent. "You need to leave this place." "I don't even know what this place is," I managed through clenched teeth. My vision swam. The chamber was warping, its edges curling inward like burning paper. "Why did you bring me here?" "We didn't," Elijah said from the far side of the now flickering chamber. "It brought itself through you," he pointed at my neck. "The mark you carry is not a brand. It's a latch, a biological key." My mind reeled. My breath came in short bursts. "So what? You're saying I'm possessed?" Miriam shook her head. "Worse, you're tethered." A sound echoed from the far tunnel, a scraping, dragging hiss. Something was coming. Elijah's gaze hardened. "If we don't sever it, the gate will open, permanently, through you." I blinked at him, suddenly cold. "Gate? To where?" Neither of them answered. We ran. Down another tunnel, one I hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind a collapsing stone pillar. Miriam grabbed a torch from the wall. Yes, an actual torch, and lit it with a flick of her fingers. No lighter, no spark, just fire, summoned like it belonged to her. "Wait, how did you—" I began, but she cut me off. "No time. Keep moving. If it follows, don't stop." We sprinted for what felt like miles. The tunnels shifted behind us, walls reconfiguring. ceilings dropping, passages stretching. My body moved on instinct, even when my mind felt numb. Eventually, the passage opened into another chamber, this one circular, its walls covered in carvings. Not just symbols, scenes. I slowed as the images came into focus, a spiral of stories told in stone, people standing at a portal of light, a great storm swallowing cities, black suns orbiting bleeding skies, and in the center of it all, a figure, with an eye in its chest, reaching toward the heavens as tendrils snaked from its back. Miriam knelt and began drawing a pattern on the floor in salt she'd pulled from a leather pouch. Elijah produced a small vial of what looked like thick, dark liquid, blood, maybe, and poured it into the design. "What are you doing?" I asked, breathless. "Cleansing the tether," Elijah said. "From me?" "Yes," Miriam said without looking up. "But you won't like it." They didn't wait for my consent. Elijah grabbed my shoulders and forced me into the center of the symbol. The salt ring flared, the carvings on the walls igniting in sequence. Light flooded the chamber, then turned dark, like every particle had reversed, and then it began. The pain wasn't physical, it was deeper, a peeling of layers I didn't know I had. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed. I tried to claw my way out, but my limbs didn't obey. Inside my mind, I saw flashes, memories that weren't mine, births and deaths of alien worlds, cities built from bone and fire, beings of impossible, geometry whispering in harmonic languages. And in the midst of it all, the orb, watching, always watching. "You're unraveling," Miriam said calmly. "Don't resist." But I couldn't not. The thing inside me didn't want to leave. It liked the gateway I'd become. Suddenly I was standing, not in the chamber, but in the tunnel again. Except this one was infinite. It stretched in both directions into forever, lined with doors of every shape and size, wooden, glass, metal, stone, flesh, and the orb floated beside me. It spoke, not in words, but form, images, feelings. It showed me the future it wanted. A world opened, humanity remade into vessels, consciousness overwritten by something ancient and merciless, a long shadow falling across the earth. I screamed, "No!" Then Miriam appeared beside me in that mind space. She grabbed my arm and whispered, "Fight it. You are still you. It only has the power you allow it." I looked down. The mark on my neck glowed, pulsing like a heartbeat. I reached up, grabbed the skin, and tore. Pain exploded behind my eyes. The dream collapsed. When I came to, I was lying in the salt circle. Miriam knelt beside me, her face pale and streaked with tears. Elijah stood at the edge, looking away, arms crossed. "You did it," she whispered. I sat up slowly. "Is it gone?" She hesitated. "It's severed, but it's still watching. It always watches. That can't be undone." I nodded slowly. My body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. Elijah stepped forward. "Now you understand. This isn't about you. It never was. The orb is not a being. It is a force, a pattern of entropy that seeks shape. We were its wardens. You, accidentally, became its vessel." I laughed bitterly. "Lucky me. There are others," Miriam said. "Other watchers, other gateways. We stop them when we can. When we can't," she didn't finish. We returned to the surface by a different path, one that spat us out nearly a mile from where I'd parked. The sky was pale, the sun low on the horizon. My phone worked again. My limbs felt like stone. "Will I be safe?" I asked as I opened the car door. Miriam stared at me for a long moment. Then, "Safe is a human word. You'll be aware. That's the best you'll get." Elijah handed me a small envelope. Inside is salt, charcoal, and a sigil. "Keep them above your basement door. If the mark ever reappears, call us." "How?" "You'll know." he said, and walked away. That night, I sat in my kitchen again, same chair, same flashlight, same knife. But this time, I felt different. Not calm, not brave, but awake. The house was still. The basement door was closed. No sounds came from below, but I felt it. The weight, the hunger. Like a fingerprint pressed against the back of my brain. The gate was closed, but it had learned the shape of me, and I knew one day it would try again.